It hurts to admit that you have no control and no power. Just like it hurts us to see those kids in cages because we think to ourselves, man, we have no control, no power, until we realize for a moment that we have all the power. Amen. We have all the resources among us. We have all the ability, all the wherewithal to make it happen. Is it going to be easy? No. It requires sacrifice. It requires pain. But I think when we speak about ICE and their detention facilities, I think it's important to measure something out. When I saw what was going on in terms of how they dealt with mental illness and how they simply put them in a cage and forgot about it, it reminded me of 17th and 18th and 19th century mental hospitals, where they would literally just chain people or put them inside a cage. So it's not that ICE doesn't want to be or wants to be inhumane. It's beyond that. It doesn't have the capacity to be humane. It doesn't even have the ability or the resources, the professionals, the protocols, the semblance of humanity. It's not even organized barbarism. It's basically barbarism with the illusion of organization. I think that when we bring all of this together as a group of people, I think one of the best things that we can do is network with one another, right? This is a space where I feel like we're all here for the same reason. But we shouldn't think that we don't have this many people in the room and we don't have one or two enemies present. We always have to remember that there is a need for public conversations and for private conversations. Social media is very important for organizing, but it's also a Fed trap. It's also a way to get everybody to give you their diary and tell you what they're doing and tell you where they are and tell you who they know and tell you what they said to who they know. You know, I put out an album a long time called Revolutionary Volume 2. Produced mostly by my brother Southpaw, who's in the building somewhere. Where's that brother at? But what was interesting is that I was called a conspiracy theorist because I made 3 specific claims on the record. One of them was that the Iraq War was based on lies. Oh my God! I turned out to be so wrong about that back in 2003. Then I claimed that the government was tapping your emails and your phones. I said, and people said, technically that's ridiculous. You conspiracy theorist. How could you say these things? I'm not saying this for shock value. I'm saying it because the worst thing that we can do as people is doubt our instincts, right? Is doubt your resolve. The worst thing a person can do is doubt their intuition. We feel like that after we've been in an abusive relationship, right? We think to ourselves, man, you know what? I knew this person was bad for me. I knew I should have gotten out earlier. I ignored my intuition. We've been in an abusive relationship with this stepfather called America for quite some time. They moved into our house about 500 years ago, and they stole our indigenous children then and tried to remake them in schools, these native schools. I visited one of these schools with my brother, rest in peace, Russell Means, a great indigenous activist. God bless him. And he showed me these classrooms that were now closed to the public because the school had become a museum. And when I went in these classrooms, I saw horrible things. I saw places where kids had been placed on the wall and whipped. I saw inside their desks where they had carved, "Send me home, get me out of here." And then the saddest part is I saw a picture of a native boy with a tear running down his eye and a hand grabbing him from behind. I think that when we talk about the horrors that are going on in this country, we have to say, we can't say that's not who we are. We have to say that's not who we strive to be, but that's what this country has been. Because the truth of the matter is that when we say things like, oh, we're all immigrants, no, we're not all immigrants. Some people were here for thousands of years. Some people did not choose to come here. And on top of that, we're lied on about what happened when they got here. And I want to touch on that very, very importantly. Because I think that there are a lot of false narratives that are built to create distance between the black and brown community so that we don't have more of these conversations, right? When I hear things like, oh, you black people sold yourselves into slavery. Oh, listen, brother, I come from Harlem, which means I had to do my P's and Q's on this. So I learned that in the early 15th century, 16th century, the European kings decided to create a faction, a break to the factional disputes so they could exploit the slave trade in West Africa. They also decided that every king of West Africa who was not down with the slave trade could then be replaced and put with a person that would engage in the slave trade. So what are we saying? We're saying that when a king was not down with this particular movement, because they realized that chattel slavery on this side of the world was different than the indentured servitude that Africans practiced amongst each other. And this is just fact. It's that that was no longer acceptable and that king needed to be removed. So don't oversimplify the struggles of people. Also, when we talk about the people that need to be deported, they're not here, we ask ourselves, and I've had war in Afghanistan, we're protecting the poppy fields of people that support the invasion and burning the heroin fields of people that support the Taliban. Oh, so that heroin that comes from our allies is good enough for a nigga to shoot at his arm here, but the Taliban heroin isn't good enough too? When I see stuff like that, it leads me to understand that hypocrisy is not just a tool, but it's an ideology of what we've been dealing with here, right? We project, or rather this country projects on others what it thinks is going to happen. And this happens with our allies as well. So we hear things from Israel like, oh, these Palestinians want to push us into the sea. The people of Gaza can't even keep the lights on. They're being given substandard water. There's electricity for 4 hours a day. If anybody's getting pushed into the ocean, it's them. But in order to project these things, you have to make it seem like someone else is the violent aggressor. Oh, these people, they're all rapists. Excuse me, but the whole Latinx, whatever the fuck you want to call yourself, we exist because we are the children of rape. Do you understand that? Latino people in general are a product of rape. Because we're black, we're indigenous, we have European ancestry, but we've never really dealt with that idea, right? We've never really dealt with the idea that our women were property to them, that they were used for that specific purpose. That when you read these old books, and when I talk about old books, I don't mean from like 1910, no. When you read old books from like 1820, I'm a collector, an avid collector of ancient books or something, right? You read stories about these so-called settlers or frontiersmen, and they met indigenous women that had filled their vagina with sand. And I wondered, what did this practice come from? And they said that made it harder for them to get raped because they expected to be raped passing through any area. They've always felt a sense of entitlement to our bodies. And we have to understand that everything that the United States has ever done has been tested on indigenous people first. Before the Middle Passage, right? They began testing the system of indentured servitude to slavery on indigenous people. But of course, the biological warfare that they implemented took hold and killed millions. So that project no longer became feasible. For people that will say, oh, well, that's just sickness. Don't be naive, right? The Crusades had already happened. They used to take bodies that were already rotten and catapult them into Jerusalem when they first invaded, the Crusaders first invaded, because they wanted this disease to spread. No one was ignorant about what biological warfare was. They just didn't call it that specifically. But that doesn't mean that that wasn't the primary weapon of choice. Being from Peru, I learned history backwards. I learned that 150 Spaniards overthrew an empire of 100 million people. And then when I read real history, and I said, well, wait a minute. The Incas were an empire, right? And they had lots and lots of people that were part of the empire. And there were people on the fringes of the empire that felt intimidated that they would be made to be part of the empire. So what did Pizarro and his allies do? They went to those people first and they said, well, aren't you tired of being ruled by the Incas? The same gambit that Cortez played with the Aztecs. Aren't you tired of being ruled by the Aztecs all the time? Wouldn't you want to rather be free? However, of course, this was a pipe dream. And now when we come here to America, we hear the same thing. Would you like to come here? Would you like to be free? Well, why can't I be free in my own country? What happened to my country? What happened to the intervention of this country? Because lately we've been hearing a lot about people meddling in elections. And as an individual that comes from South America, I can tell you that the United States talking about another country meddling in its election, as much as we want to be critical of President Putin and everything going on, and 45 and that charlatan himself, we have to admit, this country has overseen the toppling of democratically elected regimes for the better part of 2 centuries. Even its allies, even allies that helped it exist, like Haiti, right? The United States wouldn't exist without Haiti. Latin America, as we know it, wouldn't exist without the Haitian Revolution. After all the things that have happened, we're looking for one solution, and I think that's been our problem, right?